The Watchers is a brand new supernatural horror movie directed by Ishana Night Shyamalan, the daughter of one of my favorite directors of all time, M. Night, and it's based on the book by A.M. Shine, also called The Watchers. It just came out today, and I saw the earliest possible showing that I could in my state, and I have a lot of thoughts that I want to share with you guys. But before I get into the review, consider subscribing. I talk about and review movies all the time on this page, but I also talk about TV shows and video games. And anything horror gets special treatment on this channel. It's my favorite genre of anything ever. So I went into this movie completely blind. I love doing that, especially with horror movies. I didn't watch a single trailer. I didn't watch a single teaser trailer. I didn't even read the description of the movie when I purchased the tickets online. I just wanted to fully embrace the journey that this movie was going to take me on. And the journey that it took me on was surprisingly clunky and confusing and oftentimes frustrating. But don't get me wrong, it did have some wonderful sights along the way. And with that being said, let me first talk about all the things that I liked about this movie. The first being the plot. The plot on paper is right down my alley. Movies like this tend to be some of my favorite horror movies ever. If you don't know what the plot is, it focuses on a girl played by Dakota Fanning, and she travels into the vast Irish forest, and she ends up losing her car and getting stranded in the middle of nowhere. And one thing leads to another, and she gets trapped in a building with 3 strangers. And every night the Watchers, these weird supernatural creature-like beings, come and terrorize them. But like I mentioned, generally speaking, I tend to love movies like this. Horror movies that take place primarily in one location with a very small cast that are at odds with each other at times, but have to come together to fight against some sort of force, whether it's a killer or a supernatural being or a ghost or whatever. I just love stories like that, and that movie is like this most of the time. And when this film embraces that aspect of itself is when it's at its best. When you have these characters kind of bickering with each other or relying on each other, when you see them question what's actually outside, when the horror starts ramping up and what's actually outside gets revealed slower and slower and slower as the film progresses, that's when the movie is at its absolute pinnacle. The direction in this movie is also very effective and very good most of the time. There's some shots that really kind of creeped me out. I found to be really eerie. Like I said in the intro, this movie is directed by M. Night Shyamalan's daughter, and you can definitely see that in a lot of this movie. She clearly was heavily inspired by her father in a lot of places. Specifically, the use of flashbacks in this movie and how the flashbacks mirror what the character's going through in present day is exactly like how it's used in a lot of M. Night movies. Also, there's this TV, and the TV is playing this very funny thing, and it shows it sometimes, and that felt like something straight out of an M. Night movie from the early 2000s or the late 90s. And also, just the general tone of this movie felt like it could have been an M. Night movie. But don't get me wrong, this movie doesn't feel like it was made by M. Night Shyamalan. This movie has plenty of its own unique flavor, unique flair, and its own unique direction style that's very apparent throughout. But with all that being said, The Watchers is a very flawed movie in my opinion, and now I'm going to get into some of the critiques that I have with it. First off is that this film could have been named Exposition the movie. I swear 60% of the dialogue in this movie was just a character telling us the lore, telling us the plot, and if that's not what was happening, then it was a character just outright saying how they were feeling. Again, I don't even think I'm exaggerating. If you took all of the scenes of exposition in this movie and strung it together, it was probably upwards of 40 minutes. And then when you think a specific character is done explaining everything to us, they turn on a computer screen and a different character starts explaining stuff to us for another 10 minutes. And then when the movie is coming to a close and you think there couldn't possibly be any more exposition, the movie near the end has another like 5 to 10 minutes of exposition. It's insane. This movie just does a very bad job of showing us and not telling us. It just tells us over and over and over and over again. But not just with exposition in terms of the plot, but also with character arcs and how characters are feeling and what they're thinking. There were a lot of spots in this movie where dialogue felt very forced, but also just the themes and the meanings and the metaphors were served to us on a silver platter, spoon-fed down our throats, like they didn't trust that we would know the message, the meaning that they were trying to get across. Like, it's not that deep. But to be fair, I don't know if this is a problem with the screenwriting or if these issues also existed in the book. If these issues also existed in the book, then this is a perfect adaptation in terms of the screenplay. Also, no spoilers here, but I was not a fan pretty much at all of how the story ended up playing out, especially in the third act. It took a huge risk and it completely pivoted. So much so that it straight up kind of turns into a dark fantasy movie and less of a supernatural horror. And some people might be a big fan of that. Some people might like where this plot goes, but I didn't. But overall, there's potential here for sure. I'm really, really looking forward to this director's next movie. And this was far from a bad movie. I'm probably still going to buy the 4K when it gets released. I'm still going to put it on my shelf. And I will watch this movie from time to time. It had enough redeeming qualities about it to make it good, in my opinion. But it kind of feels like if you had a friend and your friend wants to kind of become a chef and they just start learning how to cook, and then they serve you a dish and you try the dish and then you take a bite of it and you're like, wow, you kind of nailed this very unique sauce. That's really, really good. And the seasoning is spot on. But then the more you eat it, you realize that the chicken is kind of raw and the silverware that they handed you is kind of dirty. And they also handed it to you on a very flimsy paper plate. But anyway, that's my quick and brief thoughts after seeing The Watchers. Have you seen it yet? If you have, let me know what you've thought about it in the comments. And if you haven't seen it yet, let me know. Are you going to watch it or are you going to ignore it completely? And if you're going to ignore it completely, let me know why. But anyway, once again, consider subscribing if you haven't already. And thank you for watching, especially if you watched this far.